All right, so wait, no. I have no idea what I'm going to say.
It's story time. So
All right. Yeah. What's gonna happen is Rebecca, Emily, Megan, and I are gonna be playing a game called Conducted Story. And how this game works is they're gonna be telling a story. They're gonna be telling it one at a time. But I'm gonna be conducting, so I'm gonna be telling them who's I'm gonna be so I'm just saying who's telling what story at any given time. And they're just gonna come up with a story off the top of their head. What But first, what we need is a title, and for that title, first I need a proper name.
Hmm.
Samantha.
Victoria's Secret.
All right, I'll spell Sucrette with a U.
Beautiful.
Sucrette.
Sucrette.
I thought you were gonna go secrete.
No.
Victoria's Secret.
Surcrette. Sucrette.
Sounds good. Secret.
Okay.
And a type of produce.
Noodles.
Noodles.
Is that a type of produce?
I don't think it is.
It's
Also,
not.
It is not, but I like it anyway.
I like noodles.
Noodles straight off the vine. Let's go.
So the name of the story is Victoria Sucrette and the Giant Noodle, starting with Megan.
Once upon a time, there was a lovely young woman by the name of Victoria Sucrette. She was French, and she lived in the French countryside.
Living on the French countryside is a little difficult when you're the feisty young vixen that Victoria really was. Everyone says, "Bonjour, Madame Sucrette," and she doesn't know how to respond.
So she simply responds by letting out an angsty teenage sigh.
No one understood Victoria Sucrette, which meant that she spent a lot of the time out on her parents' farm. They had big, long vineyards just
Aching and oozing with different types of fruits and vegetables, aside for one very specific tree. Now, this tree in question was towards the middle of the orchard, and for the longest time, no one could really, it's an orchard, sure, no one could
really decide the meaning of this orchard and why this one particular tree was there. People
People came from far and wide to look at the strange little fairy circles around it. They were often little precious stones in rings.
And people said, how did these fairy circles appear? Why are they here? Is it some secret message from Earth above?
So they spent all of their time hoping and praying that maybe at some point they would get an answer to their questions. And one night, as Victoria Sucrette was
Sitting by the tree, picking up the precious stones to throw at people in the marketplace who said, "Bonjour, madame." Something caught her ear. She heard something interesting from behind her where she was sitting against the tree.
It sounded almost Italian. So she went behind the tree to investigate the source of the noise.
And all she heard was, ooh, because that's obviously Italian sounding.
Because that's what Italians sound like, exactly. So as she investigated, she saw this tiny little fairy in a little chef's hat with a little mustache, and he was crying. And so she came over and she
patted the fairy on the back. And she said, "Little fairy, why are you crying? You're bothering me."
And the fairy replied, because I am trying to summon the giant noodle from the sky. And it's making me very sad because the giant noodle won't come down to me.
So Victoria glances at this tiny Italian elf and says, "Well, that's not my problem. Goodbye."
Victoria Sucrette sat in her spot against the tree. But she heard
that Italian fairy continuing to weep, and she decided
to give her ear to the little Italian elf. And the Italian elf said, actually, it has everything to do with you.
You see, Miss Victoria, it's you.
Who can summon the giant noodle for me? I don't have enough
Voluptuousness to really get that thing to come down.
from the sky where it was prophesied many years ago.
Many moons ago was it prophesied, and I believe that
You just might be the noodle queen, and because of your gorgeous tits and your voluptuousness.
The little Italian fairy lifted up his little chef's hat and he pulled out a tiny crown of dried noodles. He sprinkled a little
Parmesan over them, which wasn't really helpful because the noodles weren't cooked, so it was just like dried Parmesan. But then he gave it to her.
And she said, wow, I feel like no one's ever truly seen me before. And this is the first time I really feel at home in this French town. So she
let out, instead of her angsty teenage sigh, a loving, mature sigh.
And now that she had her crown and she had her loving sigh and her compassion was brought to her, she looked down at the elf and said, "What do I
do now?" But then she was interrupted by a giant crash, and it was the noodle!
The noodle crashed down around the tree in a giant tube, and she
let out a giant yelp! Woo! And
she looked around. Apparently, all the condensation
from the sky actually started to cook the noodle, and its structural integrity was starting to fail. And the pasta fairy panicked, and he said, "I need your help.
You have to tell us that you do believe in noodles. You do. You do." So they began to chant, I do
believe in the noodle. I do believe in the noodle." And as they chanted,
"I do believe in the noodle," the noodle started to crack. It was
feeling very emotionally vulnerable, and it opened its giant noodle mouth and said, I
don't think anyone has ever
understood how it feels to be a giant noodle until
you came along and you said,
"I do believe in noodles."
Because no one's ever believed in me before. Not as a giant noodle.
Not as a friend, not as a coworker, no one.
Not as a father.
My children didn't even believe in me as a noodle. They said, "You're just a grain."
You're just a grain is all you are, and you will never be anything else, you stupid idiot. And I thought that my life was over, but you
were the one who raised your voice in chant and allowed me
to come down and tell you that I'm your dad. And
finally, Victoria had all the answers. She knew why her angsty teenage sighs were the only thing she could let out, why she was never understood. It was because she herself was a noodle.
The Parmesan from her tiny crown started dripping onto her face, and she felt
welcome for the first time in her life. And they all embraced in one giant dance.
A giant round of celebration and happiness. And as they danced and they enjoyed each other's company, they felt themselves start to lift from the ground, and Victoria took the hand of the pasta fairy
as they rose to the heavens to go home.
And home was a beautiful silver pot with water boiling, and they all melted into a giant mixture of happiness. The end.
Yay!
Woohoo!
She ascended to the pasta dimension. Good for her.
Yeah, of course she did.
She's the pasta queen. What
She
else
has
is
to go
there?
back home. This, like, the ending almost feels Rocky Horror-esque, and I don't know why.
Don't dream it, be it.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my god, they're going back home to the planet. Like, this is
I'm
it.
going home.
Yeah.